Firstly, I want to say actually it's just lovely to be here, and it's very humbling, and I'm a little bit nervous, but it's actually a really joyous occasion, and yeah, so just lovely to see you all. I'm going to start with a story about slightly esoterically maybe or differently, with a story about a fox cub, and end maybe picking up my interest in sci-fi and Tolkien and whatnot with an experience of a wizard. So we once had a fox cub stuck in our basement, and it couldn't get out, and it stayed down there for days, and I used to go down and try and get it out, but it would scarper into this tiny crawl space and I couldn't get it out. And it would subsist on drinking water out of the toilet and eating cat biscuits. And this went on for quite a few days, and eventually I figured out that I needed to leave a trail of food up the stairs and out, and I left a trail of bacon. And so yeah, it went up the stairs, across the kitchen, out into the garden, and the reason I'm starting with that story is that at times, like my life has been like the fox stuck in the basement, because it has been involved suffering and feeling isolated, and Buddhism has been my kind of trail out. So I want to talk about what the suffering was, what the basement was, and then talk about what the trail has been out. So the suffering for me was associated with work. My basement was work, and I was addicted to it, and I loved it. So it was addiction is part love and hate, isn't it? So yeah, I love this. I love being needed, and that Mitra has picked up some of this already. But I love the mission. I love being needed. I love the limited amount of power. I love the influence. It was a whole universe in itself, and but it was all consuming and kind of ate me up eventually. And when my kids turned up, when Felix and Celeste turned up, there became a crisis for me, and the crisis was I could no longer do this job that I'd involved long hours, and I didn't want to do it. And so I kind of backed off into more and more manageable roles, but lost status, lost influence, lost meaning, and a kind of a void opened up. And what entered that void was anxiety and depression. So that was, going back to the fox cub, that was the basement for me, and the trail. I'm now going to talk about the trail that has led me out of that. With hindsight, the key thing that led me out of that situation was walking around Nunhead Cemetery with two twins sleeping in a pram and listening to free Buddhist audio, and in particular listening to Mitra, who many of you will know as a teacher at the LBC, and he was my favourite. Like, I'd listen to everything that he had to say, and he named what I was feeling, and he provided a path out, and the way he spoke was very earthy and very pragmatic, which spoke directly to me. And I've got a quote of his, which maybe give you a flavour of the type of teacher he is, and how earthy it is. Yeah, so he starts, "The reason I don't like the term spiritual," I mean, he already had me at that, is because what we call the spiritual life is the truly human life. It's not as if you have a human life and then you have a spiritual life. Human life is what we're about. it's about deepening this life of ours. So yeah, and I've listened to his stuff over and over again, and yeah, maybe I was at that point kind of a kind of fireside Buddhist, not really doing anything. I didn't really understand it, but some of it was going in. I started filling out employee surveys at work as a Buddhist. So I was toying with this thing. And then, yeah, but my kind of crisis of what was essentially an existential crisis was going up and down for quite a few years. And then, yeah, as Mitra said, I arrived here not very long ago, January 22, after a kind of really a lot of anguish over the kind of Christmas season before, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand it, and yeah, I sat down and looked at this figure, and it just had a really, really deep impact, and I felt an enormous sense of relief. I can't even really put it into words how the kind of, if you've got a hell of a lot of mental pain and then just suddenly feeling it lift, yeah, it kind of, I knew that this was something important. And I guess so that's the first bit of trail I've had up the basement stairs and out. The second is Mitra. Yeah, you saw something in me. You took a punt. I saw some real strength in you, and I'm glad that you took that risk. And I joined the Brixton study group. So that's like most Tuesday nights for 3 or 4 hours talking about the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, and meeting lots of lovely men. So including Dan, who's here, and Jack, and Tom, and Sergio. Have I missed anyone? Hope not. And lots of intimate moments talking about like our lives and the things and how hard life can be and how joyous it can be, and also seeing like amazing creativity and people relying on each other when they're suffering. And yeah, you start as a group of strangers, but over time, you know, you get real bonds, and that group is, I mean, sometimes I don't want to go to the study group, but then I go and I'm always happy I've been. And it's a real source of nourishment in my life now. And then the last kind of morsel of food on this trail was going on retreat to Rivendell last autumn. And Rivendell, strangely, is a name out of a Tolkien thing, which I grew up in the log cabin that I grew up in was called Lothlorien, which is the other elvish place in Tolkien. But anyway, so I thought that was quite strange. So why was Rivendell important? So it was a weekend retreat, right? It's not long. It's like you go on Friday evening and you come back Sunday afternoon. But it was important because it settled a lot of doubt in my mind about making this step. I don't think Lottie's here today, but Dan and Lottie and I went on a walk, which is there's a slot in the middle of the weekend where you can do a kind of long walk, and we talked about becoming a Mitra, and Lottie provided the very good advice that there's no right way to become a Mitra, and I was concerned. I had this long list of reasons why I couldn't do it. So that, yeah, it was really formative on that. And then I had a genuinely kind of wow moment at the end of the weekend. I was eating, on the Sunday morning, I was eating breakfast in silence, eating some porridge, and suddenly the beauty of the world like opened up to me in a kind of like in a way that I've never experienced in my life before, and it was like slow motion, and yeah, everything was just infused with beauty. And I've got a quote which which I'll come on to at the end, which describes it better than I can. And that effect lasted for days, and it was really joyful and wholesome feeling. And in some ways, I kind of felt almost invincible. I don't know if it's the best word for it, but something like that. That sounds sort of defensive, but it wasn't like that. Right. So to sum up, like in some ways, I'm kind of spiritually kind of ragged. My meditation practice can be flaky. I'm not always the best parent. I'm sometimes not the best partner. I'm sometimes a bad student. I like do my reading on the way to the study night. I can be an exacting boss and things. But what has opened up to me, and why I'm here today, is ultimately when I am practicing, when I am being generous, when I am meditating, there is an expansive quality that opens up in one, and life becomes easier, like fluid, like dynamic, like spontaneous. That you can be a good parent. You can be in the modern parlance, you can be your best self. I can be a better partner. I can be warm-hearted at work, and that has demonstrated to me time and again what Buddhism on that sort of practical level can do, and how life-affirming that is. Buddhism has also offered the access to the divine in me and in the universe, and this speaks to the void in my life that sparked my crisis. So all of that taken together, if you like, the practical effects in my life, but also that kind of needing to speak to something deeper in the world, has given me confidence to make this commitment. So I've come out of the basement and I can see the garden. I'm going to finish with a reading from Ursula Le Guin's novel, A Wizard of Earthsea, which describes well my experience at Rivendell. In that moment, Ged understood the singing of the bird and the language of the water falling in the basin of the fountain, and the shape of the clouds, and the beginning and the end of the wind that stirred the leaves. It seemed to him that he himself was a word spoken by the sunlight. Thank you.